Hi, Shmuley, how are you? Hello, Shmuley. Can you hear me?
Hello, Rabbi.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Hello, Rabbi. Can you hear you loud and clear, Rabbi? How are you?
Thank you. Thank you.
How are you, Ken?
Good, and you?
Right, Baruch Hashem. Thank God.
Glad to hear it.
Hello, Rabbi. Hello, everybody.
Hi, John.
Oh, hello, John. Okay. I'll give it a minute and we'll start. Okay. Welcome, everybody. Today is chapter 2 of Nidorim. Nidorim means vows. There's a whole book of the Talmud called Nidorim, all about vows. Vows are very important because there's a sanctity and a gravity to our word. Our word should be our vow, our bond. And that's why we have Kol Nidre. And we have the annulment of vows before Rosh Hashanah, precisely because we take our words very seriously. And we don't want, God forbid, to be in violation of keeping our vows, because it's a very serious offense. We're going to read in a few weeks in Parshas Matos that whatever emanates from our mouth, we have to follow through on. And if we don't, that's a biblical violation. So that's why we have sometimes to annul a vow. Sometimes the person makes a vow and he's not able to keep it for reasons beyond his control or reasons he didn't anticipate when he made the vow. He has to actually go to a rabbi and do a nullification of vows, and there's quite a procedure. I've done it myself on one occasion, and I've done it for other people on more than one occasion. And it all shows that we take our word very seriously, quite differently, radically different from what the anti-Semites make us out to be. Okay, with that introduction, following on yesterday, Echad hanoidim mipi atzmai, the same laws apply whether one took the vow on his own volition or another person states a vow for him and he says Amen. Excuse me, we have learned previously with the Soita, the woman, excuse me, and the woman of suspected infidelity, and the Kohen says an oath and she says Amen. And likewise with in laws of Shvuos, we learned just the other week, the laws of oaths, that if you say Amen to someone else's oath, that means you're accepting the same commitment that that person has made. So whether you said it yourself or you said Amen to someone else's, it becomes valid and you become responsible to keep your word. 2, A person who takes an oath is not forbidden to partake of the entity which he forbade to himself, unless he makes a verbal statement to that effect, and his statements must match his intent, as we explained with regard to oaths. So usually the vows we're talking about, like the vow of the Nazarite, which we learned in the Parsha 2 weeks ago, he takes a vow not to drink wine or cut his hair for 30 days or a year or forever or whatever. Usually these vows are either to do something or not to do something, to forbid something to himself. So his statements have to match his intent. If by contrast, one intended to take a Nazarite vow and instead vowed to bring a sacrifice, or he intended to vow to bring a sacrifice and instead took a Nazarite vow, or he wanted to take a vow and instead he took an oath, or he wanted to say figs and he said grapes, both are permitted to him, there's no vow. Why? Because the words and the intent do not match. So he has to know what he's talking about, and we'll soon learn that we take this very seriously and one should not make vows frivolously. We'll learn that just now in this chapter. But the principle is that it goes by what did the person mean. And if he can explain that that's not what he meant, then he can get off the vow. 3, when a person takes a vow dependent on the intent of others, it is like he took an oath dependent on the intent of others. So we learned in the laws of oaths not so long ago. Yeah. Similarly, if one takes a vow and retracts immediately thereafter, or someone rebuked him for making such a vow immediately thereafter, and he accepted their statement that he should not have done that, and he's permitted to use the article that he mentioned that he would forbid himself by a vow. The laws of vows here apply to the same as the laws of oaths. So what is the definition, the halachic definition of immediately? Do any of you remember? How immediate is immediate?
Enough to say hello to your teacher.
Exactly. Shalom aleichem Rabbi. Peace unto you, my teacher. How long did it take me to say that? About 2 seconds. 3 max. So that means immediately is literally immediately. Number 4, the person made a stipulation and then he made a vow. He made a stipulation saying, I'm retracting from any vow that I will take from now for the next 10 years. So basically he's saying in advance that if I make a vow from now to in the next 10 years, consider it retracted. I don't want it to be effective. Maybe he knows that he has a loose tongue and he's impulsive and he wants to protect himself from forbidding himself from things that he might do on the spur of the moment. So he makes this retraction in advance. So what is the halacha? So it depends. If he says, I'm retracting from now, or he says they are nullified, or other similar statements, and then he took a vow. So it depends. If he remembered the stipulation at the time he made the vow is effective. Well, by taking the vow, he nullified the stipulation. In other words, he knew what he was doing. He was worried that he might do something thoughtlessly, impulsively, spur of the moment, without thinking, and therefore he made this advance nullification. But if he knew, he remembered that he made this nullification, and then he still vowed, that has the effect that he's canceling the nullification. If, however, he did not remember the stipulation until after he made the vow, then it's effective. Then the vow is nullified. So, because that's why he made the nullification in advance, in case he forgets. So here he forgot, he vowed, and after he vowed, he said, oh, I remember, I made a retraction in advance, just for this purpose. So then it's effective, because he forgot about it when he made the vow. So although he did not verbalize his retraction at the time he made the vow, the retraction preceded the vow, and he verbalized it beforehand, so therefore he is off the hook. However, there is an authority, there is one halachic opinion, one of the rabbis who rules stringently in this case, and says he has to remember the stipulation immediately after taking the vow. Otherwise, it's too late. 5. So let's say he made a stipulation that for the next year or the next 10 years, all my vows are nullified, and then he took a vow, remembering at the time that he took the vow that he had made the stipulation, but forgetting the subject of that stipulation or what it involved. If when taking the vow, he said, I'm acting according to my original intention, his vow is not affected because originally he nullified it. If he does not make such a statement, he has nullified the stipulation and upheld the vow. From the time he took the vow, he remembered that there was a stipulation and nevertheless took the vow. So therefore, he's clearly going against what he had annulled originally. 6, some of the Geonim, the great sages, maintain that all of these statements are applicable only with regard to vows and not to oaths. But there is a halachic authority who maintains that the laws pertaining to vows and oaths are the same. So one may issue a stipulation nullifying an oath beforehand, just as he may do it with regard to vows. 7, when a person takes a vow whose object is not clear, in other words, his wording is ambiguous, we will rule stringently. If he interprets them and he explains what he meant, he only meant to prohibit this from him and not that, there is room for both leniency and stringency. So it depends which rabbi you ask. What does this imply? For example, let this produce be considered for me as salted meat and as wine poured as a libation on the altar in the temple. We ask him, what does he mean by that? What is salted meat? Salted meat, there's nothing wrong with eating salted meat. We kasher all our meat by salting it. Wine libations in the temple, that's something that not every Tom, Dick, and Harry can necessarily partake of. So if he explains himself saying, I meant that salted meat refers to sacrificial meat. Now, sacrificial meat cannot just be eaten by anyone. It can be eaten by the Kohanim, it can be eaten by the owners, different parts are burnt on the altar. And wine poured as a libation refers to libations poured on the temple altar, and both of those things he will be forbidden to partake of. If, however, he says, my intent was a sacrifice offered to a false deity, which is rubbish, or wine poured as a libation to that false deity, he is permitted. If he took the vow without a specific intent, however, and he doesn't explain himself what he meant, then we'll assume that he meant to forbid it, and he will be forbidden from eating whatever he was or drinking whatever he was referring to. 8, similar principles apply if he uses the word cherem. Now, cherem, you're familiar with the word cherem as excommunication, right? Remember the Johannesburg Beth Din once put someone in cherem and he challenged them and took it to the High Court, and Justice Malan, a nice Afrikaans judge, ruled in favor of the Beth Din. I was in the court then to support the Beth Din. And so the word cherem doesn't only mean excommunication. The word cherem also can mean a dedication offering. It can mean something that is holy and reserved for the temple use, and therefore forbidden for personal use. So it's similar to excommunication, where a person is outside of the camp, and here too, a certain food is outside personal use because it's exclusive for the temple. So the word cherem has a number of applications. So if he says, this produce is like cherem for me, if his intention was a dedication offering for the upkeep of the temple, he's forbidden to partake of it. If his intent was a dedication offering for the Kohanim, he's permitted, because these become the priest's personal possessions and are not forbidden to others. If it belongs to the temple, it's not for personal use. If it belongs to an individual Kohen, anybody could use it if he allows you to. If he took the vow without any specific intent, we will take the stringent view and he'll be forbidden. 9. If he states, may these things, this produce, whatever, be considered like the tithes for me, like Maisa, the tithes. Now, you've already learned, I'm sure, there are quite a few different types of tithes. And many of them have different laws applicable. So we investigate his intent. If his intent was the tithe taken from animals, it becomes forbidden, because these are like sacrifices that he consecrates through his actions. As we explained, goes to the Kohen and it's no longer for personal use. If his intent was the tithe taken from grain, then it is permitted. If he took the vow without any specific intent, he is forbidden. So grain, what is the issue with grain? Why is grain lenient? Because probably, I mean, it either it goes to the Kohen, or it goes to the Levi, or it goes to the poor, but it's not forbidden. 10. If his words he uses is, these things are to me like truma. Truma is the portion of grain that we give to the Kohen. So again, we have to investigate his intent. If he meant the money donated for the sacrificial offerings, it's forbidden. If his intent was truma separated from the grain heap, it is permitted. If he took the vow without a specific intent, it will be forbidden. And similarly in all analogous situations. Now, a qualification to all of the above. When does this all apply? In a place where the terms used have these two possible different kinds of meanings. And we have to establish, what did he mean? What was his intention? However, in a place where the term cherem, for example, without any further definition, is used only to refer to the dedication offerings for the upkeep of the temple, and he says, this produce is like cherem for me, you will be forbidden to partake of it, even if he says that's not what he meant. Why? Because that's the way people in that town and that community speak. That's the normal type of language and intent that the average person has when he uses that word in that locale or at that time. And he cannot say that he meant something different from what everybody else means when they say this. Similarly, if the custom there was to use the term cherem without any further, to refer only to dedication of given the priest, then it'll be permitted. So if most people use the cherem for that, and that's permissible, so he'll also be permitted. And similar concepts apply in all analogous situations, but with regard to vows, here's a very general principle. With regard to vows, the end of 11 here, we follow the connotations understood by the people in that place, in that era. So how do we determine what a person means? The first thing is, what does that term or word or phrase, how is that term or phrase understood in that town, in that time? And if the average person means X, he cannot come along and say he means Y, unless he says it specifically. If he uses a term that the whole community understands to mean one thing, he is going to be bound by that unless he makes himself explicitly clear when he makes the vow. If it's ambiguous, it will go by what the town understanding is. And that's a general rule with regard to vows. 12. This applies in all situations, analogous to those, for example, situation when a person takes a vow which appears to everyone to involve a prohibition, but he says, that's not what I meant something else. For example, he takes a vow based on a chedim, he uses the word chedim, but then he says, no, I didn't mean to prohibit this. My intent was a si chedim. A si chedim is michmoret, it's called. A si chedim, a fishing net. So the word chedim can be used in different terms as well. So in a situation when he explains himself that he meant a specific situation, a specific detail, like a fishing net, or he took a vow based on an offering, but he said, my intent was an offering brought to the king, not to the temple. King is not a problem, you could use it. Or he said, myself is like a sacrifice for you, meaning that he's forbidding his friend from benefiting from him in any way. But then he explained himself. My intent was only to forbid him from benefiting from a bone that I set aside so that I could take a vow as a lark. Or he took a vow that his wife could not benefit from him, and then explained he meant the first wife who he's divorced from, not his current wife. So all of these explanations, it depends if the person knows Torah law or not. So in all the above, if the person who took the vow was a Torah scholar, so we can assume that he understands the fine points and the differences in all these details of language with regard to vows, then he'll be permitted. We'll accept his explanation that he only intended to mean it in this way, and therefore the prohibition that we assumed will not take effect. However, if the one who took the vow is a common person, not a learned scholar, then it's quite irresponsible of him to talk like that, because he doesn't really know the rules clearly, and he's easily getting himself into trouble. So we want to make it clear to him that what he did was wrong, and he should not continue with such behavior. So we treat him more strictly than the law even, to teach him a lesson, so he doesn't carry on like this. We make it appear to him that it is a vow, yet we give him an opportunity to ask for its release. So he'd have to go to a rabbi and ask to be released from the vow, because that's not what he meant, etc., etc. Whether he's a Torah scholar or a common person, we rebuke him and teach him not to conduct himself in this manner with regard to vows, and not to take vows as a lark or a caper, which is fancy words for a joke. don't treat vows frivolously. It's not a joke. And therefore be very careful how you express yourself, and don't make a vow without carefully considering what the effect will be. 13, if he says to his wife, "You're like my mother to me." Now, may a man be intimate with his mother? Obviously not. So basically, he seems to be saying, "You may not be intimate with me," to his wife. Or he says, "Let this produce be like chaza for me." So actually, the vow is not effective, as has been explained previously. Did you learn it yesterday, or was it in the laws of oaths, possibly? Huh? Doesn't explain why it's not effective. Did you have this yesterday? No? Doesn't ring a bell?
Yes, we did have it yesterday.
You did have this. Do you remember why it's not effective?
Basically, because, for example, your mother can never be your wife, you know, whatever. It is what it is. You can't say this pig is now fish, you know. You can't just change.
Okay, I see. It was the very last halacha in chapter 1. The person tells his wife, "You consider to me as my mother or my sister." He's permitted. He would have to tell her, "I'm taking a vow forbidding all pleasure from you." Then it would be effective. Okay, thank you, Martin. So here, if the one who took the vow is a common person, if he was a Torah scholar, he's permitted, doesn't have to ask to be released from the vow. If he took the vow as a common person, he must ask a sage to be released, because we make it appear to him that his wife is forbidden to him, or the produce is forbidden, even though really, strictly speaking, it's not. But we give him an opportunity to ask for its release, in order that people not act frivolously with regard to vows. We want to teach him a lesson. 14, although declaring property ownerless is not a vow, it resembles a vow. Hefker, have you heard the Hebrew word hefker? So when we make a declaration Erev Pesach about our chometz, we make our chometz hefker. We make our chometz that we haven't found, or we haven't gotten rid of, or haven't sold, that may be lurking in the corner of a house and we're not aware of it. We say it's hefker, it's ownerless. We renounce any ownership from ourselves, so that we should not be in violation of the prohibition against owning chometz over Pesach. So the word is hefker. If a person throws a piece of furniture out onto the street, or a garment on the street, and declares it hefker, the law is anybody can come and take it, first come, first serve. So declaring something hefker, ownerless, is not really a vow, but it resembles a vow, says the Rambam. For the person is forbidden to retract. What is meant by declaring property ownerless? A person says this property is free for everyone to come and take it. And it can apply both to movable objects and to land as well, real estate. What is the law applying to property that is declared ownerless? Whoever comes first acquires it. Even the person who declared the property has the same rights. The guy who made it ownerless he can also come and claim it back for himself. It's ownerless. First come, first serve. If he has a change of heart and says, what am I, Meshuggah? Why am I giving this away? I could use it. And he goes and claims it, then it's his. If someone else claims it first, it's theirs. 15, when a person declares his property ownerless so that it can be acquired by the poor, but not by the rich, it is not ownerless. A declaration of hefker, of ownerlessness, has to be across the board unconditional. Cannot be it's ownerless for you, but not for you. That's not ownerless. It must be like the produce of the sabbatical year that anybody can come and take it. What if he has servants? In those days they had slaves, and he declares his servants ownerless. Those past majority age acquire themselves, meaning they go free. So if a slave is a boy of 13 or a girl of 12 or older, and the owner, the master says they are ownerless, they go free, they acquire themselves. Before anyone else can acquire them, they acquire themselves. Even if they don't have to say anything, it happens automatically. However, if they are below majority age, then it's first come, first serve. When a person declares landed property ownerless, first come, first serve, but the person has to manifest his ownership. How do you manifest your ownership of land? You know, have you learned this?
No, Rabbi.
So you have to do something with the land. You have to make some kind of improvement with the land, dig something or plant something or put up a fence, something, just some symbolic act to make it look clearly that you are the owner. Just looking at it doesn't do it. When it comes to movable property, you pick it up in your hands and it's yours. But you can't pick up a piece of land. You can't pick up a house. So how do you acquire it? You have to do something with it or to it or for it. According to scriptural law, even when a person declares his property ownerless in the presence of one person, it is ownerless. And if it's no longer his, then he's not responsible to take the tithes, to give the tithes of that land. According to the rabbis, however, it's not ownerless until he declares it in the presence of three people. Why three? So one can acquire it and two can be witnesses. Should one say, this is ownerless and this, meaning another piece of property or another item is ownerless like the first one? We're not sure about that. That's an ambiguous language. So it's an unresolved doubt whether the second entity is also ownerless. If, however, he said, and this is like this first one, or he said, this is ownerless and this too, then he has clearly associated the second entity with the first, and it does become ownerless. When a person, 17, when a person declares his field ownerless and no one else acquires it during the first 3 days, he may retract. After 3 days, he may no longer retract. What he can go, and he can claim it for himself. And he'll be the same as a stranger acquiring ownerless property. 18, someone says this field is declared ownerless for 1 day or 1 week or a month or a year or for a 7-year cycle, he may retract before he or another person acquires it. Once it is acquired, whether by the person himself or by someone else, he may not retract. Why does he have the right to retract before it was acquired? He already said it's ownerless, because this is an uncommon matter to make it ownerless for a certain period. If you're making it ownerless, you make it ownerless full stop. Ownerless for a day, what does that mean? That's like a ridiculous statement. So therefore, because generally a person will not declare property owners for a limited time, he may still retract. Finally, 19, when a person comes and watches over ownerless property, looking at it so that another person will not take it, looking at it is not sufficient. He does not acquire it just by looking at it. Instead, if it's a movable property, he has to lift it up, as we said. Or if it's land, real estate, he has to manifest ownership over it. As I told you before, he has to do something to the land or the property. As purchasers acquire property, they start getting busy, doing renovations or fixing or whatever. So he has to show that he has acquired it by doing something with that land or property. And that concludes chapter 2. Thank you very much. And have a nice day and a good rest of the week. Any questions?
Rabbi, just one question. I was interested when talking about annulling vows in advance, that he doesn't make mention of Kol Nidre, and that prayer had been written and composed before Rambam's birth. It's interesting he didn't mention it.
First of all, I'm not sure that Kol Nidre was composed before the Rambam.
According to Wikipedia, it was already known in the 11th century.
Really?
It's just an interesting thought. I'll look it up further, but that's how I recall it.
Or could be Kol Nidre was composed before, but it only became really famous
Could be.
Spanish Inquisition, which was in the 15th century. I seem to
There was
remember
also
it.
doubt whether it referred to only past vows or future vows.
Okay, so, but the Kol Nidre is an annulment which we're trying to prevent ourselves from being guilty of not fulfilling our word. So it's sort of a general escape clause, if you will, sort of a legal loophole. Now, the Rambam said here that it depends. Basically, he said it depends on the language. He said it depends how you put it and what you had in mind when you did it. So it's not really a contradiction to Kol Nidre.
No, I think it's an example almost rather than a contradiction.
Yeah, that could be.
Interesting.
That could be.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Anybody else?
Thanks, Rabbi.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
man.
Rabbi. Have a good
Okay.
week, everyone.
Bye,
Thanks, everyone.
everybody. Okay, all the best.
Bye. להתראות. Thank you, Rabbi.
Cheers.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Scott.
Bye-bye.